The champagne bubbles tickled my nose as I watched the last wedding guests stumble toward their Ubers, their laughter echoing off the manicured hedges of my Buckhead estate. At 72, I'd seen enough celebrations to know when something felt off. Tonight's festivities had that bitter aftertaste of performance art rather than genuine joy. My name is Eleanor Washington, and I've lived in this 3-story Victorian mansion for 43 years. Built in 1892, restored with my late husband Marcus's insurance money, every creaking floorboard and stained glass window held our memories. The house wasn't just worth $2 million. It was priceless. But as I stood in my silk mother-of-the-groom dress, watching my only son Michael help his new wife Keisha into their rented Tesla, something cold settled in my stomach. Throughout the 6-month engagement, I tried to shake the feeling that this 28-year-old beauty queen was playing a game I couldn't see the rules to. The red flags had been subtle. How quickly she'd pushed for marriage. Her obsessive questions about my financial situation. The way she toured my house during their first visit, her manicured fingers trailing along antique furniture like she was already mentally rearranging it. "Beautiful ceremony, Mrs. Washington," called out my neighbor Janet, breaking my trance. Keisha looked absolutely radiant. "Yes," I murmured, forcing a smile. "Simply radiant." But as their car disappeared into the Atlanta night, I couldn't shake Marcus's voice echoing in my memory. "Eleanor, baby, when someone shows you who they are the first time, believe them." Tonight, I had the strangest feeling that Keisha was about to show me exactly who she really was. 3 weeks passed in blissful silence. Michael and Keisha had jetted off to Bali for their honeymoon, sending obligatory sunset photos that I dutifully liked on Instagram. I spent those peaceful days tending my rose garden and reorganizing Marcus's study, trying to ignore the nagging voice in my head. That voice grew louder when my bank called on a Tuesday morning. "Mrs. Washington, we need to verify some unusual activity on your account," said the concerned representative. "Someone's been making inquiries about your mortgage status and property liens." My blood chilled. What kind of inquiries? Legal firms mostly. Claims they're representing family members regarding estate planning. I'd paid off this house 15 years ago. There was no mortgage, no liens, just the deed in my name sitting safely in my fireproof safe upstairs. But someone was fishing and I had a sinking suspicion who. That afternoon I called my attorney, Bernard Hayes, a sharp-minded 70-year-old who'd handled Marcus's affairs. "Eleanor, I'm glad you called," Bernard's gravelly voice carried worry. "I've received some strange calls about your property. A young woman claiming to be your daughter-in-law, asking about deed transfers and inheritance laws." My grip tightened on the phone. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing, of course. But Eleanor, she knew details about your house that only someone very close would know. Room layouts, renovation dates, even the security system code." The security code. I'd given that to Michael for emergencies, never imagining he'd share it with anyone else. "Bernard," I whispered, sinking into Marcus's leather chair, "I think I'm in trouble. Don't panic yet. But maybe we should discuss some protective measures." As I hung up, Keisha's Instagram story popped up. Another paradise photo, but this time I noticed she was holding legal documents instead of a cocktail. The game was already in motion. They returned from Bali on a Thursday, and by Friday afternoon my doorbell was ringing. I opened it to find not just the happy newlyweds, but 3 strangers. A stern-faced woman in a charcoal suit, a nervous-looking man clutching a leather briefcase, and someone I didn't recognize holding what looked like official documents. "Mama Eleanor." Keisha's voice dripped honey as she embraced me, her Chanel perfume overwhelming. "We have the most wonderful news to share." Michael stood behind her, his usual warm smile replaced by something I'd never seen before: cold calculation. My baby boy, who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on ants, looked at me like I was a business transaction. "What's all this about?" I asked, gesturing to the strangers crowding my foyer. The woman in the suit stepped forward. "Mrs. Washington, I'm attorney Patricia Collins. We're here regarding some important estate planning matters that need immediate attention." "Estate planning?" I laughed, but it came out hollow. "I'm 72, not dead." Keisha's perfectly veneered smile never wavered. "Mama, with Michael and me starting our family, we just want to make sure everything's properly arranged. You know, for tax purposes and protection." The man with the briefcase, apparently a notary, Set up a portable table right there in my living room without asking permission. The audacity sent heat rushing through my veins. Now wait just a minute, I started. It's really just a formality, Michael interrupted, avoiding my eyes. A trust arrangement that protects the house and makes things easier for everyone. But I caught the look that passed between him and Keisha. It was the look of conspirators who thought they'd cornered their prey. That's when I realized this wasn't estate planning. This was a heist. Sign here, here, and initial here, Attorney Collins said, spreading papers across my antique coffee table like she owned the place. The documents were thick, filled with legal jargon that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. I picked up the first page, my reading glasses sliding down my nose. Transfer of property deed. The words swam before my eyes. This isn't estate planning. This is a deed transfer. Keisha's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something predatory underneath. Mama Eleanor, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We're family now. Family. I set the papers down with shaking hands. Family doesn't ambush each other with legal documents. Michael finally spoke, his voice flat and rehearsed. Mom, Keisha and I have been talking. With the neighborhood changing and property taxes going up, it makes sense to transfer the house into our names. We'll take care of everything, the maintenance, the insurance, all of it. And where exactly would I live? The silence stretched like a taut wire about to snap. Keisha leaned forward, her eyes glittering. Well, there's that lovely senior community across town. Shady Oaks has wonderful amenities. Shady Oaks. A nursing home. The notary cleared his throat impatiently. Ma'am, we really need to move this along. I have other appointments. That's when Keisha played her ace. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to a photo of a positive pregnancy test. Mama Eleanor, I'm carrying your grandchild. Don't you want what's best for your family? The room fell silent except for the grandfather clock's rhythmic ticking. 43 years of memories seemed to pulse through the walls. Marcus teaching Michael to ride his bike in the foyer, Christmas mornings by the fireplace, Sunday dinners in the dining room. And they wanted to steal it all. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice deadly quiet. You want me to sign over my house, the house my husband and I built our life in, so you can, what? Flip it? Sell it? Turn it into some investment property? Michael's face flushed. Mom, you're being dramatic. We're not kicking you out. We're just securing the family's future. By stealing from the family matriarch? Keisha's patience finally snapped. Her sweet facade cracked like cheap veneer, revealing the calculating woman underneath. Look, Eleanor, let's stop pretending this is about sentiment. You're old. You're alone. And frankly, you can't afford to maintain a house this size on your widow's pension. The air in the room turned arctic. Even the notary shifted uncomfortably. This house is worth over $2 million in today's market, Keisha continued, her voice gaining confidence. Michael is your only heir. We're just accelerating the inevitable. I stood up slowly, my arthritis forgotten in the rush of pure fury. The inevitable? Sign the papers, Eleanor. Keisha's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried the weight of a threat. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you never see your grandchildren again. Not this one, she patted her still flat stomach, and not any others we might have. The grandfather clock chimed 4 o'clock. Somewhere in the kitchen the ice maker rattled. Outside, a lawn mower hummed in the distance. Normal sounds of a normal day that had just turned into the worst day of my life. Michael stared at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. My baby boy, who I'd raised to be better than this, was going to let his wife steal everything I had left. That's when I started laughing. My laughter started as a chuckle but grew into something that made everyone in the room step back. Keisha's confident smirk faltered as I laughed until tears ran down my cheeks. Oh, honey, I gasped, wiping my eyes. Oh, sweet child. You forgot to check something very, very important. Attorney Collins frowned. Mrs. Washington, I assure you these documents are legally binding. I'm sure they are, I interrupted, walking to my antique secretary desk. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out a thick manila folder I'd hoped never to need. But they're missing one crucial detail. I spread my own papers across the coffee table, watching their faces as they read the header, Washington Family Trust Irrevocable. You see, Keisha, after Marcus died, I wasn't just grieving. I was planning. This house, along with all my assets, was placed into an irrevocable trust 20 years ago. The color drained from her face. Michael is listed as the primary beneficiary, yes. But only after specific conditions are met. Conditions that include my natural death and a 2-year waiting period to prevent exactly this kind of manipulation. I turned to my son, my heart breaking as I saw the realization dawn in his eyes. The house isn't mine to give away anymore, baby. I made sure of that after watching too many elderly friends get swindled by their own children. Keisha's hands shook as she grabbed the trust documents. This can't be legal. You can't just. I can, and I did. Bernard Hayes drew these up in 2004. Ironclad, he called them. The notary was already packing his equipment. I'm sorry, but if the property is held in trust, these deed transfers are invalid. Keisha whirled on Michael. You said she owned it outright. You said it would be easy. And there was. The confession I'd been waiting for. Michael's face crumpled as the weight of his wife's words hit him. Keisha, what are you talking about? You said this was about protecting the family. Protecting the family? She laughed bitterly, her careful composure completely shattered. Michael, your mother is sitting on a gold mine while we're drowning in student loans and credit card debt. I've been planning this since our 3rd date. The confession hung in the air like poison gas. Attorney Collins and the notary exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly realizing they'd been drawn into something far more sinister than estate planning. Our 3rd date. Michael's voice cracked. Keisha, you told me you loved me. You said. I said what you needed to hear. She spun toward me, her mask completely off now. And you manipulative old witch, sitting in this mansion like some fairy tale queen while young people can't even afford apartments. I remained calm, having spent weeks preparing for this moment. So the pregnancy? Her silence was answer enough. The sudden romance with my son? Michael's a means to an end, she spat. A sweet, gullible means to a $2 million end. That's when my son finally found his backbone. Get out, he whispered. Excuse me. Get out, he roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Get out of my mother's house. Get out of my life. But Keisha wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone, scrolling furiously. You think you've won? I've been documenting everything. Your unsafe living conditions, your mental decline, your inability to care for yourself. Adult Protective Services is going to have very interesting conversations with you, Eleanor. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. False reports to APS? I smiled again. Oh darling. You just made a federal crime. Attorney Collins stepped forward, her professional instincts finally kicking in. Mrs. Jackson, I need to advise you that filing false reports with Adult Protective Services is a felony in Georgia. As your legal counsel, I strongly recommend. You're fired, Keisha snapped. All of you get out. But the damage was done. The notary was already calling someone, probably his supervisor. Collins was discreetly recording notes on her phone. And Michael was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. 22 months, I said quietly. That's how long you two have been together. You met him at that coffee shop on Peachtree, didn't you? Right after I mentioned him to my book club, talking about how successful my architect son was becoming. Keisha's eyes widened. How could you possibly? Honey, I've lived in this neighborhood for 4 decades. Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter works at that coffee shop. She told her grandmother about the pretty girl who started asking questions about that handsome black architect who comes in every Tuesday. I tilted my head. Funny coincidence how you just happened to be there the next Tuesday reading architectural magazines. The pieces were falling into place for Michael too. That's why you knew so much about my work. Why you seemed so perfect. Research, I continued. Social media stalking. Neighborhood gossip. You built an entire personality designed to attract my son. Even learned to cook his favorite meal, my grandmother's cornbread recipe that you somehow intuited he'd love. Keisha's jaw clenched. Prove it. I don't have to prove anything, sweetheart. You just confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud in front of witnesses. I gestured to the mortified attorney and notary. Federal charges carry serious prison time. For the first time since she'd walked into my life, Keisha looked genuinely afraid. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I walked to Marcus's study, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors like a countdown timer. From his old filing cabinet, I retrieved a thick folder labeled Keisha Investigation and returned to the living room where everyone waited in stunned silence. You see, baby girl, I wasn't born yesterday, I said, settling into my favorite armchair. When a virtual stranger starts dating my son and immediately begins asking detailed questions about my finances, I pay attention. I opened the folder, revealing photographs, printed social media posts, and official documents. Keisha Marie Thompson, originally from Birmingham. Dropped out of Auburn after 2 years due to unpaid tuition. 3 previous relationships with older men, all of whom coincidentally owned valuable property. Michael sank onto the sofa, his face pale. Mom, how did you? Private investigator. Your father always said, trust but verify, and honey, I verified everything. I held up a photograph. This is Keisha with Robert Manning, age 68, from Montgomery. Dated him for 8 months before his family accused her of elder abuse when he nearly signed over his antebellum mansion. Keisha lunged for the folder, but I pulled it back. Charles Davidson, age 72, from Birmingham. Found dead in his home 3 days after changing his will to leave everything to his devoted girlfriend. That's slander. Keisha shrieked. It's public record, darling. Death certificates, police reports, civil lawsuits. You have quite the pattern. Attorney Collins was frantically taking notes. The notary had stopped packing and was openly staring. Michael looked like he might vomit. The best part. I smiled coldly. I've been feeding you false information for months. Every detail about my finances, my health, my vulnerabilities. All carefully crafted lies designed to see exactly what you do with them. I stood up, my 5'4" frame somehow towering over everyone in the room. And now I know exactly who you are. You're lying, Keisha whispered, but her voice shook. Michael loves me. We're having a baby. Show me the pregnancy test, I said calmly. Her face went white. What? The pregnancy test. Not a photo, the actual test. Should be easy enough if you're really pregnant. The silence stretched until Michael spoke up, his voice hollow. Keisha, you said you took 3 tests. Where are they? I threw them away. All 3. Including the digital one that displays results for 24 hours. I shook my head. Honey, I raised a boy. I know every pregnancy scam in the book. Michael stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. Jesus Christ, Keisha. Were you ever going to tell me the truth? About any of it? Tears started streaming down her face. Real ones this time. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage at being caught. You don't understand, she screamed. Do you know what it's like growing up poor? Watching rich people live in houses like this while your family gets evicted every 6 months? I earned this. By lying? By manipulating my son's emotions? By threatening to steal my home? Your home, she laughed bitterly. You didn't earn this place. Your husband's life insurance paid for it. You just got lucky that he died young and left you rich. The entire room went silent. Even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. That's when I realized Keisha had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because she'd just insulted Marcus's memory in front of the wrong woman. The change in my demeanor was instant and terrifying. Michael later told me he'd never seen me look so dangerous. Not angry, but coldly, calculatedly furious. Get my house. My voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of 43 years of love, loss, and protection of this sacred space. Eleanor, let's not be hasty, Attorney Collins started. No. I turned to her. You came into my home under false pretenses to help this woman steal my property. You're complicit in fraud. I suggest you leave immediately before I call the state bar. Collins grabbed her briefcase and headed for the door without another word. The notary was already gone. Michael, I said without taking my eyes off Keisha, you have 30 seconds to decide whether you're leaving with her or staying to explain yourself. Keisha grabbed his arm. Baby, she's bluffing. Old people do this, they get paranoid and turn on family. We can fight this. But Michael was staring at the investigation folder, seeing photos of his wife with other men, reading police reports, understanding for the first time that everything he'd believed about his marriage was a lie. How long were you planning this? He asked her quietly. Michael, please. How long? Since before I met you, she screamed. I've been planning this for 2 years. Your mother flaunts her wealth at those stupid charity galas while people like me work 3 jobs just to survive. She doesn't deserve this house. Michael stood up slowly, his architect's hands trembling. Mom, I'm so sorry. I thought I was in love. You were in love, I said gently. With someone who never existed. Keisha made one last desperate play. Fine. Keep your precious house. But don't think this is over. I'll destroy both of you for this. That's when I smiled again. Sweetheart, you still don't understand. I'm not the victim here. You're the trap. I walked to the fireplace mantel and retrieved an item I'd placed there before their arrival. A small digital recorder still blinking red. Georgia is a one-party consent state, I announced. Which means I can legally record conversations in my own home without telling anyone. Keisha's face went ashen. You recorded us? Every word. The fraud conspiracy, the threats, the false pregnancy claim, the admission of targeting my son specifically for his connection to me. I held up the device. Federal prosecutors love audio evidence. Michael was reading through my investigation folder, his expression growing more horrified with each page. Mom, she's done this before. Multiple times. 5 times actually. But she got sloppy with you. Rushed the timeline because she's being investigated by authorities in Alabama for Charles Davidson's death. Attorney Collins, who hadn't quite made it to her car, appeared back in the doorway. Mrs. Washington, if you have evidence of a pattern of elder fraud. I have evidence of attempted fraud, conspiracy, and interstate criminal activity. The FBI has been very interested in Miss Thompson's activities. Keisha backed toward the door, her designer heels slipping on the Persian rug. This is entrapment. You can't. I can, and I did. You see, darling, the moment you targeted my family, you made one fatal error. I stood up, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years but also feeling more powerful than I had in decades. You assumed I was just another weak, lonely old woman. Outside I could hear car doors slamming. Through the window I saw 2 black SUVs pulling into my circular driveway. You forgot that I spent 30 years as a social worker specializing in elder abuse cases. I know every trick, every manipulation, every red flag. The doorbell rang. And I know exactly who to call when I spot a predator. Agent Sarah Chin of the FBI Financial Crimes Division entered my living room with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Behind her, 2 local police officers and a federal prosecutor made the space feel suddenly very small. Mrs. Washington, thank you for your cooperation in this investigation, Agent Chin said professionally. Ms. Thompson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and interstate criminal activity. As they read Keisha her rights, she made one last desperate appeal to Michael. Baby, please. I love you. Everything I said was because I was scared. But Michael was holding the investigator's report, staring at photos of her with previous victims. Which name is even real? Keisha Thompson? Keisha Marie? Kimberly Thomas. Her real name is Kimberly Johnson, Agent Chin replied. She's wanted in 3 states. As they led her away in handcuffs, Keisha screamed threats and obscenities that would have made a sailor blush. The sound of her voice faded as the police cars pulled away, leaving an almost supernatural quiet in their wake. Michael sat alone on my sofa, head in his hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I thought she loved me. I sat beside him, taking his hand like I had when he was little, and scraped his knee. She did love you, baby. She loved what you represented, access to me in this house. That's a kind of love, just not the kind that builds a marriage. How do I move forward from this? One day at a time. Starting with remembering that you're a good man who got fooled by a professional. It happens to the smartest people. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun set through the stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the walls that Marcus and I had chosen together so many years ago. Your father would be proud, I said finally. Not of what happened, but of how you handled it when the truth came out. 6 months later, Michael met Sarah at a community center where he was volunteering to build homes for single mothers. Their love story started with hammers and honesty instead of champagne and lies. And my house. It's still mine, filled once again with genuine laughter and real family dinners. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be the victim. The debate in my head won't stop. Was this the perfect example of self-preservation, or did Eleanor give up on people too quickly? I need outside perspectives on this one. Drop your thoughts below. And if you love stories where people finally say, I deserve better, subscribe because I've got more that'll make you want to stand and cheer.